Headlines on this Tuesday evening. Typhoon Danas slammed southern Korea, bringing with it heavy downpours and strong gusts of wind. Typhoon advisories and warnings blanket the region, and we bring you the very latest on where it is headed. A resumption of operations at a nuclear plant, an engine test for long-range missiles, and a call by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for a forceful reunification of the Korean peninsula in 3 years' time. Now, South Korea's intelligence agency briefs lawmakers on what it's learned of late about North Korea. And some welcome news on Korea's economic front. Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok says the country is showing signs of recovery from its prolonged slump, while the IMF refers to Korea as a country that can weather global market volatility. Well, these stories and more next on Primetime News. Good evening and welcome to Primetime News. It's Tuesday, October 8th here in Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Yoo Ji-hye.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thank you so much for joining us. We begin with the latest on Typhoon Danas, which hit Korea's southernmost island of Jeju on this Tuesday.
It has brought heavy rain, strong winds, and high tides to the south coastal area. The Jeju Regional Meteorological Administration says the island is under the direct influence of the typhoon, and restrictions are in place on the island's roads, while ferry and flight services have been canceled. Over 1,700 households experienced blackouts, and around 100 schools on Jeju were closed for today. The government has placed public officials on emergency notice to prepare for and prevent further damage. And staying with Danas, the typhoon has prompted authorities to postpone the joint naval drills between South Korea, the United States, and Japan that were scheduled to take place from Tuesday to Thursday.
The trilateral drills were to include nuclear-powered American aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington, a guided missile cruiser from the United States, as well as Aegis destroyers from South Korea and Japan. A South Korean senior Navy official said Tuesday that consultations were underway on whether to postpone the drills for a few days or cancel them outright. The official added that the George Washington has been moved to a safer place and is currently on standby. And prior to news of the delay in drills, North Korea stepped up its rhetoric against South Korea and the U.S., warning of a, quote, horrible disaster.
It's barely the latest in the flurry of heightened criticism directed toward the South and its allies in recent weeks. Here's Arirang News' Kim Ji-yeon with this report.
The North Korean army has ordered all of its troops to be on a war posture against the U.S.-led drills on the Korean peninsula. The North Korean Central News Agency reported Tuesday that the General Staff of the Korean People's Army protested against the deployment of the U.S. aircraft carrier George Washington for the joint military exercises with South Korea and Japan. It added that the U.S. would be responsible for any horrible disasters that may arise. A spokesman for the Army chief argued that if the U.S. truly wanted to see the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, it should be Washington, not Pyongyang, that should prove its determination. This move is in line with an escalation in criticism of the South and its allies in recent weeks. Over the weekend, the North Korean Nodongshinmun newspaper referred to President Park Geun-hye as a ruler of a puppet government that praises its past authoritarian rule. And the North Korean Committee for the Peaceful Reunification of the Fatherland, which deals with unification issues, said that the Park administration has been fueling conflict in the region by disrespecting Pyongyang. Last week, the committee threatened a preemptive strike against any military provocations from South Korea and the United States after the two allies endorsed a deterrence strategy to fight against potential North Korean nuclear and missile threats. Local experts in Seoul say that the recent escalation in rhetoric is a sign that Pyongyang wants Seoul to change how it deals with the North. Yang Woo-jin, professor of the University of North Korean Studies in Seoul, told the Hangyeoldae newspaper that relations between the two Koreas are not likely to improve anytime soon unless the Park administration changes its hardline stance on issues related to the North. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And it was just last month when inter-Korean relations seemed to be on an upswing. Now, operations at the Kaesong Industrial Complex were resuming. Reunions of families separated by the Korean War were set, and there was even talk of a resumption of tours to Mount Kumgang in the north.
But what a difference a few weeks can make. Inter-Korean tensions are on the rise again, and South Korea's intelligence agency on Tuesday revealed a string of provocative moves that Pyongyang has made in recent weeks. Our Kim Hyun-bin tells us more.
3 announcements regarding North Korea were made by the National Intelligence Service in a briefing to lawmakers on Tuesday afternoon. First, Pyongyang has resumed operations at the 5-megawatt reactor in Yongbyon nuclear complex. That would seem to confirm a recent report by 38 North, a website run by the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University, which said after reviewing recent satellite images that it appeared the North had resumed operations at the plant. The briefing also said the North recently conducted an engine test for a long-range missile at its Tongchanli launch site, the same site from where Pyongyang launched its Una-3 long-range rocket last December. And in its third revelation, the nation's intelligence agency said that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has declared that he will carry out a forceful reunification of the Korean peninsula within 3 years. No further details were revealed regarding the statement, but experts say Kim's remarks are aimed at solidifying his leadership and gaining an upper hand in dealing with South Korea and its allies. The South Korean agency also warned that the South Korean military should stay on alert, as the reclusive state is beefing up its military capabilities by deploying multiple rocket launchers near the West Sea. Major changes have also occurred within Pyongyang's military hierarchy. The communist leader recently carried out a huge reshuffle of 44% of the military's top-ranked officials. Experts believe the major changes are a strategic move by Kim to gain better control of his forces. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
In overseas diplomacy, the 2-day APEC summit came to an end earlier on this Tuesday, with the leaders adopting a joint declaration on promoting free trade and staying away from protectionist measures.
The agreement falls in line with what President Park had been calling for during her stay in Bali. Arirang News' presidential office correspondent Oh Jin-ju reports.
The key focus of this year's APEC summit was strengthening the multilateral trading system with the goal of achieving balanced growth within the Asia-Pacific region. On the last day of the gathering in Bali on Tuesday, the leaders adopted a joint declaration and agreed to extend their commitment to resist protectionist measures by a year to 2016. President Park put great emphasis on trade liberalization throughout the 2-day meeting. On Monday, in a keynote speech at the first session of the summit, the president has stressed that trade liberalization is the most cost-effective way to promote economic revitalization, job creation, and welfare enhancement. In an interview with Indonesian newspaper The Jakarta Post published on Tuesday, President Park reiterated that APEC member nations should strive to block the spread of trade protectionism. She said although countries may be tempted to engage in trade protectionism when the economy gets bad, history has shown that promoting trade at such times eventually leads to economic recovery. President Park's call for tangible outcomes at the 9th World Trade Organization ministerial meeting set to take place in December was also reflected in the leaders' declaration. The president in particular had called for progress in the stalled Doha development agenda, a current trade negotiation round of the WTO. In a separate effort to promote trade and investment on the sidelines of the summit, President Park had also sought ways to push ahead with FTA negotiations or further develop previously signed trade pacts during her bilateral talks with the leaders of China, Canada, Mexico, and Peru. President Park is expected to continue her push for trade liberalization and sales diplomacy in her bilateral summits with leaders of Brunei, Singapore, Australia, and Myanmar here in Brunei, where she'll be attending the Korea-ASEAN, ASEAN Plus 3, and East Asia summits. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News, Bandar Seri Begawan.
And at the National Assembly here in Korea, following the ruling Senate Party's address a day earlier, it was the main opposition's turn to lay out its goals for the current parliamentary session on this Tuesday.
It stressed the need for a restoration of democracy and the welfare of the general public. Our political correspondent Kim Hyun-ji has the details.
At a gathering of the full parliament and members of President Park Geun-hye's cabinet Tuesday, Democratic Party floor leader Chun Byung-hun accused the Park administration of putting a dent in democracy and the welfare of the general public, the values the Constitution says the government must uphold. Calling the first 8 months of the Park administration an era of crippled governance, Chun said it all emanated from, quote, the spy agency's interference in last year's presidential election and President Park's refusal to acknowledge it. He argued the president has refused to communicate and work with the opposition and has turned a blind eye to the party's protests against the government and ruling party. Chun called for tough reforms of the National Intelligence Service, including limits on its investigative power, that would be led by the parliament.
The investigative power of the National Intelligence Service must be limited to information on North Korea, here and abroad. South Korea is the only advanced democratic nation where the intelligence agency has investigative authority.
Saying that President Park has taken a step back from many of the campaign pledges she made on economic democratization and welfare, the opposition party floor leader also vowed to push for fair business practices and universal welfare.
The Democratic Party will push for a paradigm shift to an economy where wages and consumption fuel growth, ending the old era of neoliberalism, where land development and speculation led growth.
Chun made clear that his party will oppose the government's attempt to revise the nation's tax code, saying that it is a scheme that places a heavier revenue burden on salaried workers and the self-employed, and asks very little from the wealthiest members of society. In response, the ruling Saenuri Party said the Democratic Party's claims about a democracy in retreat under the Park Geun-hye administration are nonsense, and that Korea's democracy is on par with some of the most advanced nations in the world. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
Well, cyberspace and the world created by the IT sector are becoming increasingly relevant for all. They define international trade, communication, and the functioning of state affairs, yet they also bring along threats and dangers too.
A global conference pertaining to those pending issues on cyberspace is slated to take place next week here in Seoul. And to tell us more about what we can expect from the upcoming Seoul Conference on Cyberspace 2013, we're joined by Mr. Choi Sung-ju, Ambassador for International Security Affairs. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Ambassador Choi, this certainly is a huge event. I hear that you're expecting more than 1,600 representatives from more than 90 countries. Can you explain to us, how did this conference come to Seoul?
First of all, international community recognized the high-level development of ICT technologies of South Korea, and secondly, our country accumulated considerable level of experience through the series of hosting a series of international events.
Well, capacity building is a key new agenda item. Why is it so important that we help build up the capacity infrastructure of developing countries?
In fact, for the first time in this process of a cyberspace conference, Korean government, South Korean government initiated to discuss this issue of capacity building. We value this issue because, actually, there are very serious, digital divide between developed and developing countries in the field of IT technologies and the cyberspace-related technologies as well. Through the promotion of international cooperation and capacity building particularly, we can expect co-prosperity.
Speaking of developing countries, what do they want to learn from this conference?
I do expect that through this conference, developing countries could learn something more concrete and specific regarding the ICT-related technologies through their on-site visit to Samsung or LG or other related companies in Korea. At the same time, they will have the occasion to share experience of other countries, other developed countries, or South Korean experience on the issue of cybersecurity.
Well, Korea has extensive experience as being a developing country. What can we extend in terms of a knowledge transfer to the developing world?
So South Korea is now one of the donor countries in only a matter of time span of half a century. This is since the end of the Korean War. So we are ready to return what we have received from international community, particularly at the time of extreme poverty and extreme difficulties South Korean people were facing.
Well, what's the most pressing issue or challenge in cyberspace, especially in terms of cybersecurity?
Well, as a practical way, the most important is the establishment of confidence and trust, and kind of a CBM, confidence building measures among the countries concerned. So that's why through Seoul conference, we do hope that more countries could be interested in starting the multilateral CBM or regional CBM to strengthen international security and to cope with the problem of cybercrime or cybersecurity.
Well, it certainly sounds like there's going to be an amazing conference ahead of us. We wish you the best in that. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
The International Monetary Fund revised down Korea's economic outlook for next year to 3.7%, but the number suggests that the Korean economy will continue on its gradual pace of recovery. Arirang's Hwang Ji-ae tells us why.
The International Monetary Fund cut its growth forecast for Korea for next year to 3.7%, down 0.2 percentage points from its earlier forecast. This, however, is greater than the 2.8% growth outlook for this year. The IMF report suggests that Korea will be able to maintain its gradual pace of recovery in 2014 and cited the central bank's recent rate cut and supplementary fiscal spending as the reason. Data in this month's report by the Ministry of Strategy and Finance on the latest economic conditions in Korea also points to the strong prospects of a sustained recovery.
The IMF revising down the growth outlook means the pace of recovery is weaker than expected. The trend of economic growth remains firm.
The report says major economic indicators, including consumption, investment, and output, are showing signs of improvement amid stable employment and inflation figures. Korea's industrial output grew 1.8% in August from a month earlier, the fastest pace in 9 months on strong automobile and mobile phone production. There were more than 25 million people at work in August, up more than 430,000 from a year earlier, the largest on-year job growth in 11 months. The finance ministry added, however, that weak activity in the private sector and external risks coming from the U.S. budget standoff and the Federal Reserve's planned bond-buying stimulus tapering could have a negative impact on the economy. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
And speaking of the recovery, business was booming for Korean shipbuilders in the first 9 months of the year. Data from London-based Clarkson Research Services shows that the combined orders for Korean ship contracts rose 88.7% in the first 3 quarters of the year compared to the same period a year earlier. Domestic shipbuilders won a combined 10.8 million compensated gross tons of new orders in that time frame, good enough for 36% of orders worldwide. And while that's a positive development for the sector, which has been struggling through the economic downturn and slowing demand, industry watchers were quick to tamp down expectations of a full-blown recovery as new shipbuilding prices still remain low compared to 2 years ago.
And as the U.S. government shutdown enters week 2, U.S. President Barack Obama says he's willing to talk with Republican leaders, but not under the threat of a debt default and a prolonged government shutdown. Our Connie Kim has the latest.
With the U.S. government shutdown extending into its second week and the debt limit deadline looming, U.S. President Barack Obama on Monday called on Republican leaders to hold a vote to reopen the government and raise the debt ceiling.
The truth of the matter is there are enough Republican and Democratic votes in the House of Representatives right now to end the shutdown immediately, with no partisan strings attached.
The president was responding to a statement by House Representative Speaker John Boehner on Sunday, who claimed that there are not enough votes to pass a resolution to end the shutdown. Boehner said, however, that he is willing to talk with the president about the issue of raising the debt ceiling, which currently sits at $16.7 trillion US dollars. Lawmakers have until October 17th to increase the nation's multi-trillion-dollar debt ceiling to pay its bills and avoid default. Obama has said that he is willing to talk to Republicans on fiscal and budget issues, but not under threat of a shutdown and debt default. Separately on Monday, White House National Economic Council Director Gene Sperling did not rule out a short-term increase to the borrowing cap, which could offer more time for an agreement. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
A day after the LA Dodgers won Game 3 to take the lead in their series against the Atlanta Braves, they were looking to finish things off at Dodger Stadium.
And in order to do so, their ace made an early return to the mound. Stephen Shea joins us from the Sports Center to give us the recap. Hello.
Hey guys, the Dodgers sent out their top pitcher Clayton Kershaw to seal the deal, while the Braves were looking to bring the series back to Atlanta for one last game. LA was the first to strike, with Carl Crawford smacking 2 solo shots in the first and third innings. The Braves came back to tie it up and took the 3-2 lead by the 7th. Now in the bottom of the 8th, with 1 on and no outs, it was Juan Uribe. He fought off 2 bunt attempts before hitting a 2-run homer to left, putting LA up by 1 and leading them to win 4-3. They will now face either Pittsburgh or St. Louis in the National League Championship Series. And coming home, it's time for KBO playoff highlights. The Tucson Bears visited the Nexen Heroes for Game 1 of their playoff series. Now the crosstown rivals going for the crucial win. It's the first ace sac fly by the Heroes. Seo Dong-uk scores the first run. Then it's the cleanup MVP, Park Byung-ho. He adds a solo homer to center. It's 2-0 Nexen. Next inning, the Bears, Chung Soo-bin singles 1 home, and so does Yang Eui-ji. Its scores are level 2-2. Now we go on to the bottom of the 6th. Nexen gets the lead, but top 9th, Tucson ties it up. But Nexen's Lee Taek-gun sends everyone home in the bottom of the 9th with the walk-off hit. Nexen wins with final score of 4-3 for the early lead in the series. Now we go on and finish things off with football. Arsenal's misfit striker Park Ju-young appears to be lining up for a loan to the English football's second league team, Wigan Athletic. Wigan boss Owen Coyle is desperate to shore up his injury-prone offense and is seeking to make an emergency loan offer, though none has been made just yet. Now it's a chance for the shunned striker to get some real minutes and play some first-team football and earn his way back on the South Korean national squad ahead of next year's World Cup. Now that does it for me here in the Sports Center. This has been Stephen Che. Check back at midnight for the latest in the world of sports.
The nation's east coast and southern regions are dealing with extreme weather conditions right now due to Typhoon Danas.
Let's go over to our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center for the latest. Bo-kyung, could you give us the update on the typhoon?
Well, Tia, the typhoon warnings have been extended to Gyeongsang Province, Busan, and waters south of the East Sea and the South Sea. But warnings have been lifted in the seas off of Jeju Island. Let's take a look at the map for details on the storm's path. Now, the typhoon has currently passed Jeju Island and is passing the waters south of Busan. It should move towards Dokdo tomorrow early morning before hitting Sendai, Japan. Now, in the east coast and southern regions, there should be strong winds blowing at a rate of about 34 meters per second. Also, there may be more than 200 millimeters of rain on the coast of Yeongnam and the east coast regions until tomorrow early morning, so please look out for floods and landslides. Nevertheless, the rain should gradually come to an end later tonight in the central and western regions. Now, taking a closer look at tomorrow's forecast, Gwangju should make it to 27 degrees. Meanwhile, Seoul, Daegu, and Busan hit 26. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon and Jeju rise to the mid-20s and Mount Kumgang tops out at 14. Well, that's all I have for you this hour, and I'll be back with more updates after midnight.
Thank you, Bo-kyung. And that's our broadcast on this Tuesday night. I'm Yoo Ji-hae in Seoul.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening. We'll see you soon.